Perdition's End. An Owl House Tale written by Old Ben Knotty. A Pinkie Pie party. Philip's journey back through the Everfree forest was far less treacherous and terrifying than his first. It seemed Rarity, to Philip's surprise, was far more well acquainted with these woods than he had thought, and she knew exactly the paths to take that would be most free of the creatures that crept through the inky black glades and haunted the icy cold streams of the deeper woodlands. At last, they found their way back to the outskirts of the forest. "This, my dear Philip, is where we part ways," said Rarity, at last, "and might I add, it was a pleasure to meet some pony who understood in such great detail the fashioning of exquisite cloaks and masks. I suspect that Candlelit Royals will be most impressed when I use your tips in my next fashion boutique, if I do say so myself." "Alas, Lady Rarity, it seems you are correct," said Philip, looking at the evening light of the sun sink beneath the horizon, "although I am afraid I have little idea of where my next destination ought to be." "I might be able to assist with that," replied Rarity. "A little birdie told me that I ought to direct you towards Sugarcube Corner." "The bakery?" asked Philip. "The one with a giant cake on the roof?" "The very same," Rarity responded, "and if I'm mad, the eclairs they serve there are simply darling." And with that, she waved goodbye and trotted back to Carousel Boutique. Philip watched Rarity go, her allegiance, her bravery in the face of darkness, her sophistication, quite timid at a loss for words. Now, Philip had never seen the sun fall below the horizons before twilight's reign. If he had, he might have noticed what other ponies had noticed, which was that the twilight of the Sequestria was far more dreamy and all-encompassing than it had ever been under Celestia. Celestia had always been a ruler who put her love into the daylight, the sparkling streams and the light shining through the treetops at noon, but she never truly understood the fading hues of the sun after it had started to set, of the violet of the flowers blooming at dusk, of the subtle twinkling of the sparkling stars. Yet Twilight, true to her namesake, understood all of these things. So Philip, without ever quite realizing why, felt himself reach a most agreeable mood by the time he reached the wooden entrance to Sugarcube Corner. As he opened the door, he realized it was completely dark. "Ah, I see what's happening," thought Philip. It was just like when Kikimora and the first Golden Guard had opened his congratulations on subjugating the Boiling Isles. Party. He had turned on the light and there, before him, had been the most repulsive, overdone display of filth he had ever seen. Every disgusting demon, warty witch and contemptible coven head had been there, showering him with false praises emanating from their damp mouths. He had hated it, as he hated all events with large crowds of people. It made him long for the times he had growing up, where it was just him and his brother. Better get this over with, he thought, and flipped on the light. Surprise! He heard a cheerful voice shout, and indeed, once again, he was surprised. For instead of the crowds of ponies he had been expecting to see before him, what he saw was four: Pinkie Pie, Rainbow Dash, Applejack and Fluttershy. He stood there, mouth ajar, and quickly shook himself out of it. Pinkie Pie, of course, broke the silence first. "At first I was going to plan a good party with every pony, and I mean every pony in Ponyville, but then I told Fluttershy about it first because Fluttershy was the only pony who had spoken to you, and Fluttershy was like, 'Pinkie, Philip isn't the sort of pony who likes big events. I think we should maybe consider something a little smaller.' And then I was like, but Twilight didn't like big crowds when she came to Ponyville, and I threw her a giant party. And then Fluttershy reminded me that that party didn't go so well considering everything that happened afterwards, and I thought she had a point, so I decided that I would try to have a much smaller scale party, but with no less care than I would put into any Pinkie Pie party." Philip looked around at the smiling, welcome faces. He looked at Pinkie Pie. Despite all she had seen, the simple, boundless trust and optimism had still not left her eyes. He looked at Rainbow Dash, cool and collected, at the steadfast Applejack, whose countenance reminded him most of home. He looked at Fluttershy, and in her warm, kind, forgiving eyes, he felt a new kind of pain. A pain he had kept buried behind excuses and lies and motives and more dead pals than souls than he could remember. A pain he had never, ever let himself feel lest it tear his heart out. Remorse. Remorse for the death of his brother, and regret. Philip slowly trotted over to the wooden table. He looked round Sugarcube Corner, at the friendly faces, as the smell of baking wafted through the room. What am I doing here?" He started, and the warm smiles of Pinkie turned to a confused frown. Rainbow Dash, seeing Pinkie's expression, just shrugged, but Fluttershy and Applejack looked on, solemnly, as Philip continued. "I was a human," he muttered. "I was a human boy. I went to school with other humans, with other people like me, and I had a brother. Yes, this is for certain, a brother. Then I went to the boiling isles, and I became something else. No, not quite a demon, no. Something like a witch, yes, and something like a demon, but I was far beyond any of them. Then I became a skeleton and died. And now, he glanced down at his hooves, now I'm a unicorn. I'm a unicorn. In a pony party in a land of ponies where the weather is untimed and I pony can use magic whenever they feel like. How many times must I change? How many more things must I be? Not enough that every land I find myself is taken away from me. No, now even my own body is as malleable and changeable as my clothing. He stopped. His heart pounding, and a little voice in the back of his head telling him, so this is how they felt. Every time a Grimworker learned the truth, that they had been just another body trapped in an endless cycle of revenge and loss. And now that cycle has been transferred onto you, the last witch hunter general. Rainbow Dash and Applejack had retreated into the far corner. They were quietly whispering amongst themselves. Fluttershy was still quiet, unsure of what to say next. Again, it was Pinkie Pie who broke the silence, yet this time, she did it with more solemnity. Philip Whithaven, she started, I know not every problem can be solved by throwing a party. I know not all ponies people are quite as excitable as I am. My sister Maud, Cracky Doodle Donkey, even Fluttershy, have all taught me that. But I also know that sometimes, just sometimes, it can't hurt to enjoy just one night. So how about we start with a simple game of pin the tail on the pony? Pinkie leapt out of her seat and grabbed the blindfold and the tail. Philip looked around, and all the other ponies eagerly nodded him onwards. He gulped. He had never been invited to parties like this before. Caleb, his brother, had, of course, but Caleb had always told him that he was too young even when Philip was much older than he was when Caleb was invited to his first party. Caleb had always tried to keep him away from other people, that's why he never had any friends, that's why he was so distraught when he thought he had been kidnapped. But Caleb wasn't around anymore. And for the first time, Philip didn't feel like this broke his heart. He felt strangely free. So in the end, Philip did get involved with the party games, with Pin the Tail on the pony, with every silly little thing Pinkie Pie had planned out. And for the first time in his life, he felt all his worries and cares just melt away. At last, as fate decreed it must, the party ended. So, Philip, said Pinkie, Cola, how did you enjoy your first ever Pinkie Pie party? I really did enjoy myself, Pinkie, he said, and he couldn't help but give a small smile at Pinkie's squeal of pride. As he left Sugarcube Corner, he caught a glimpse in the reflection on a window of a blue flash through the air. He looked up, and there was Rainbow Dash, flying right above him. Ah, Rainbow Dash! Cried Philip, how goes it up there? Is the weather as fine up there as it is here? Rainbow Dash smirked. You're a lot more talkative now, huh? Pinkie's parties tend to have that effect on ponies. Yeah, the weather's great and all, but listen, I was talking with Applejack and, well, I think it would be easier if you just followed me there. Philip's eyes were starting to droop, and he was feeling his will to resist float away with all his cares. He nodded, and Rainbow Dash smiled as she turned on her back and lazily flew in the direction of Sweet Apple Acres, followed by a unicorn stallion with a dreamy look on his face of some pony who had discovered peace for the first time in his life. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video make sure to like and leave a comment.